Thanks for staying with Eye on Ocean County. I'm Laura Jones, and today we are talking about the Jacques Cousteau National Estuarine Research Reserve, also known as the JCNERR, correct?
Correct.
Our guest this half hour, Lisa Auermuller. She's the Auermuller. She's the Watershed Coordinator, and now Scott Haig, excuse me. He is also a field researcher. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit first about some of the coastal training that you do, and then Scott's going to jump in and explain a little bit more about some of his broader research, and then specifically into stormwater management.
Great. The Coastal Training Program, similar to the SWAMP program that Greg talked about in the last segment, is one of the programs that's happening throughout all 27 reserves around the country. And this is a program where we take the science-based information that we're collecting at the reserve and we provide it to people we call coastal decision makers. So people who, through their job as professionals or maybe as a volunteer position like on a planning board or an environmental commission, have important decisions to make or important recommendations to make to decision-making bodies, and we can give them that information or those best management practices.
All right, so Scott, tell me a little bit about what it is that you do, being in the field, a researcher. What an amazing job that must be.
Well, actually, my job is sort of the exact opposite of a field researcher in that I'm a remote sensing specialist.
Oh, okay.
And so what I do is I collect information using satellite aerial photography and analyze environmental changes in the environment or human activities from a computer lab.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating.
And so some of the research I've worked on within the reserve are things like mapping seagrass habitat on the bottom of the estuary, or mapping out where human development is occurring, or where the barrier islands are moving. So those type of things.
And this is done by satellite?
Satellite or aerial photography, depending on what we're trying to capture, what type of information we're trying to capture.
That's
right.
Fascinating. And what are some of the things that you've been learning? What's changing or staying the same?
Right.
That's a good thing.
Well, what's changing the most in our watershed is the amount of area that's being converted from forest to urban. And so over the past 10 years, 14,000 acres roughly of upland forest has been converted to urban habitat. And so that's one of the things we monitor, because it's interesting to see how those effects on the watershed correspond down to the estuary.
And so explain to folks, the pattern. You have development, and it first affects the watershed,
right,
and then the estuary.
So the major effect on estuary is on water supply and the quality and the types of water that get there. And so in natural pineland forests, much of the water goes down into the soils, into aquifers. And when you build new roads and roofs and homes, a lot of the water is then quickly funneled into the estuary system. And so that water can have nutrients and suspended sediments from the development from lawns, potentially nutrients from lawns. And so there's differences in the type of water and what the water's carrying that gets to the estuary system.
Right, we touched on that in the last segment. People may not realize, the fertilizing they're doing for the lawns can have an adverse effect.
And one of the things that decision makers around Ocean County need to realize too is that although their decisions might end at the boundary line of their municipality, the water doesn't end there. So as water flows through the watershed, the decisions that people make within their own municipality, it's really actually much broader than that, and it's going to affect Barnegat Bay and then ultimately the Atlantic Ocean. So Scott and I have been doing a lot of stormwater management work over the past few years to try to educate people about ways to do that better.
Yeah, and what are some of the things that you like to, what are some of the things that you tell the public? And people, they want to be good to the environment, and they just don't even realize that some of the things that they are doing are harmful. Right.
So one of the issues, exactly as you point out, is that people don't necessarily understand the decisions they make in their yard affect the estuary. And so in Barnegat Bay, we have a large area of seagrass habitat. That's a plant species that lives on the bottom of the estuary. It needs very clear water. And when you put nutrients and suspended sediments into the water becomes cloudier, allows less light, and the seagrass dies back. So the effect of increasing nutrients then has an impact on seagrass habitat.
We have a photo up. What are we looking at here?
That's a storm drain and how it drains into an estuary system. So that would be a storm drain if you were walking down the sidewalk and you would see a storm drain. A lot of those storm drains go directly into streams and then directly into the estuary system.
I don't think people always make the connection.
I think a lot of people think that the drain on the driveway or outside their neighborhood is a trash bin, and they don't realize that it's actually connected to a much larger system and ultimately will affect the places they like to crab or bring their kids on the Bay Beach to go swimming.
Now, when it enters into the storm drain, I think some people think, well, it just goes to a system that cleans it all out and then puts it back into the environment, but that's not so.
Well, it depends on what type of storm system was put in and how effective it's being. So a lot of these storm systems aren't necessarily maintained, and so there's a question of maintenance as well. And also, the stormwater systems that aren't working correctly can hold water, and they're supposed to allow water to infiltrate into the soil and get into the aquifer instead of into the streams.
Right.
But if they hold water, they can also be health risks. They can be breeders for mosquitoes. And so the Ocean County Mosquito Commission treats over 100 stormwater basins for mosquitoes now. So there's potentially human health risk as well if they're not maintained correctly.
We've got another picture, I believe, basins on the ground, and we can bring that one up, and you can explain a little bit about that. There you go.
So that is the result of a project that Lisa and I have been working on for the past couple of years. And so we've been mapping out the location of stormwater basins across Ocean County and the Barnegat Bay watershed. And so we know there's around 1,400 structures that have been built in the past 17 years.
And this is to collect stormwater.
Stormwater
Right.
from development. So in the early 90s, it was required in a large housing development by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection to build stormwater basins.
Right.
And so what we've gone in is worked out a way to map them using aerial photography across the landscape. And that's going to allow a lot of the people we work with to go in and try and fix the basins that aren't working correctly, because now we know where they're at. We didn't know previously where they were at.
Oh, okay.
One of the things that we've learned over time is that people made decisions on an individual site basis of where to put a basin without being able to know holistically throughout the whole watershed where other basins were in relative proximity to the one they're thinking of planning. So by having a map that shows a large picture view of all the basins throughout the watershed, we're hoping people are able to make better decisions about future basins, as well as Scott said, remediating ones that need help because maybe they've failed over time, or in construction something happened where they weren't built correctly to begin with.
And so what happens if you are having these negative impacts? You know, you have a community that goes up and people are fertilizing their lawns thinking that they're doing something good, and you know, it's impacting the estuaries. What can be done from your end? I mean, you educate the people, okay, well, we're gonna stop, but has the damage been done? Is it irreversible?
It's not irreversible necessarily. You can fix these basins. So what happens is water runs off people's lawns, it runs into these basins. And you can fix these basins in some ways that allow reduction of nutrients going into the water. So there are different ways to do that. Again, we have to know where those basins are in relation to where the nutrients are coming in, and that's a lot of what we're working on now. Another project we're working on as well is mapping out turf areas across the Barnegat Bay watershed, so areas that are grass, maintained grass. And we'll then match that up with the basin in our computer models, and we'll be able to pick out basins that have a lot of grass areas that are draining into them.
And so with that, I mean, can you put something, another chemical into the water to help it, or what do you do to help restore the balance, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Not necessarily a chemical, but you can put specific plants there.
Plants, there you go.
You can fix the basins in specific ways. There are what they call best management practices that are designed for reducing nutrients that go into the estuary system, and that's what we're ultimately trying to do.
Many of our native plants require some level of nutrients to survive. So the stormwater coming in, which has nutrients that's carried off of lawns, can be the source of nutrients for the native plants without homeowners having to add a lot of extra nutrients and fertilizer or pesticides to them. Those native plants were put there because they were originally supposed to grow here without a lot of excessive treatment.
We're about ready to go to break. Did you have something
I
else
just
you wanted
wanted
to
to say
add?
that Barnegat Bay is particularly susceptible to this type of problem because the water stays in the estuary for 60 to 90 days, and so it holds the water a long time. So a little bit of nutrient slowly builds up over that long period of time, and that's when you have a problem.
Okay. Scott, thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time
you
to
for
talk
having
to
us.
us. Lisa, you're going to stick around. We're going to talk a little bit more about the education program, and we want you to stay with us as we continue here on Eye on Ocean County. We're talking about the Jacques Cousteau National Estuarine, right? Estuarine? There you go. Research Reserve. Stay with us.